March 14, 1945. In the cold, clear sky above Bielefeld, Germany, a single Lancaster bomber climbed ponderously toward 11,000 feet, far below its optimal altitude. Inside the cramped cockpit, the pilot of PD-112s fought against the sluggish controls, coaxing his aircraft higher with every ounce of power the 4 Merlin engines could deliver. But the Lancaster was not climbing easily. Slung beneath its belly, where bomb bay doors should have been, hung a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. 22,000 pounds of streamlined steel and high explosive, a weapon so large that the aircraft's entire bomb bay had been cut away just to accommodate it. This was the Grand Slam, the largest conventional bomb of the Second World War, and beneath it, stretched across the German landscape, lay the Bielefeld Viaduct, a railway bridge that had absorbed over 3,500 tons of bombs in 54 previous attacks and remained stubbornly intact. The bridge mocked the Allied air forces. Every hit had been repaired within 24 hours. 17 direct strikes in a single raid had merely dented it. Below, in the valley, the earth was pockmarked with thousands of craters, a lunar landscape of failed attempts. Yet here came PD-112s, carrying a single bomb that weighed more than what 5 fully loaded American B-17 flying fortresses could carry in their bomb bays combined. The B-17, America's pride, typically hauled 4,000 pounds on long missions, sometimes reaching 8,000 pounds on shorter runs. Do the mathematics. 5 B-17s at maximum short-range capacity would deliver 40,000 pounds. But even that fearsome concentration paled before what British engineering had achieved, not in fleet strength, but in the revolutionary design of a single aircraft's unobstructed bomb bay. At precisely 4:28 in the afternoon, from an altitude of 11,965 feet, Squadron Leader C.C. Calder pressed the release. The Grand Slam fell away. PD-112s lurched upward 500 feet, suddenly freed from the weight. For 35 seconds, the bomb accelerated toward the Earth, its angled tail fins generating a stabilizing spin, its streamlined body slicing through the air at speeds approaching the sound barrier, 1,049 feet per second by the moment of impact. It struck the ground 30 yards short of the viaduct's southern abutment, penetrated deep into the soil, and then, 11 seconds later, detonated with the force of a magnitude 3.6 earthquake. The watching crew of a Mosquito reconnaissance aircraft, circling at a safe distance, saw the earth erupt. The pilot shouted into his radio, "You've done it!" When the smoke and debris settled, photographic reconnaissance revealed what 3,500 tons of conventional bombs had failed to accomplish. 200 feet of the North Viaduct and 260 feet of the South Viaduct had been demolished, depositing approximately 20,000 tons of rubble into the valley below. A single 10-ton bomb had achieved what months of relentless bombing could not. This was not merely a tactical victory. This was the culmination of a design philosophy that had begun in failure, been rescued by brilliance, and transformed into the most devastating precision bombing capability of the war. The story of how Britain came to field a bomber that could carry what 5 American heavy bombers could not begins not in triumph, but in catastrophe, with an aircraft that was killing its own crews faster than the enemy ever could. In the late 1930s, the Air Ministry issued specification P.13/36, calling for a twin-engine medium bomber capable of worldwide use, able to carry torpedoes internally and execute shallow dive-bombing attacks. Avro responded with the Manchester, powered by 2 massive 24-cylinder Rolls-Royce Vulture engines, each theoretically capable of producing 1,750 horsepower. On paper, the Vulture represented cutting-edge British engine technology, a complex X-configuration engine that married 2 V12 Kestrel engines into a single, ambitious power plant. In practice, it represented a nightmare. The Manchester entered RAF service in November 1940. Almost immediately, squadrons began reporting catastrophic engine failures. The Vulture's connecting rod bearings, critical components that linked the pistons to the crankshaft, failed with alarming regularity. The cause stemmed from 2 fatal flaws: restrictions on the use of silver in lubricating surfaces, mandated by wartime material shortages, and an inability to dissipate heat effectively. John Lake, an aviation historian, would later write of the Vulture, "The engine made the Manchester mainly notable for its unreliability, poor performance, and general inadequacy to the task at hand. On April 13, 1941, all Manchesters were grounded after an epidemic of engine-bearing failures. They returned to service, only to be grounded again on June 16, 1941, when more engine troubles emerged. Squadrons found themselves forced to retain obsolete Hampton bombers as replacements because the Manchesters simply could not be kept airworthy. One ex-gunner, whose Manchester lost an engine over enemy territory, recalled the terror of discovering that the aircraft, contrary to Avro's original assurances of single-engine capability, could barely maintain altitude on one Vulture. The Manchester was not just unreliable, it was deadly to its own crews. Of the 200 Manchesters built, the type was withdrawn from service entirely by 1942. For Avro and for Britain's bomber offensive, this was a crisis. The Halifax and Stirling 4-engine bombers were in production, but neither could match the payload capacity that the Air Ministry desperately needed. The war was escalating. Germany's industrial heartland demanded heavier and heavier punishment, and Britain had no aircraft capable of delivering it. Into this desperate moment stepped a man whose genius would transform defeat into the most formidable heavy bomber of the European theater. Roy Chadwick, Avro's chief designer since 1918, was not a scientist in the academic sense. He was, in the words of Harold Penrose, artistic with unbounded enthusiasm and unsparing energy, a great designer of intuitive diagnostic ability rather than a scientist, yet like all great masters was in step with the tide of knowledge and contemporary outlook. In 1940, as the Manchester's failures became undeniable, Chadwick was already at work on a solution, one so radical and so simple that it would redefine what a heavy bomber could achieve. Chadwick's insight was elegant. If the problem was unreliable engines, then replace them with proven ones. If two massive, temperamental Vultures could not deliver reliable power, then use 4 smaller, battle-tested Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines that powered the Spitfire and Hurricane fighters. But to mount 4 engines required a longer wingspan and a fundamentally different structural approach. Chadwick designed a massive wing spanning 31 meters and retained the Manchester's fuselage, with one crucial modification. He kept the bomb bay exactly as it was, 33 feet long, completely unobstructed, without a central spar running through it. This single design choice, an unobstructed bomb bay, would prove to be the Lancaster's greatest asset. Most bombers of the era, including the American B-17 Flying Fortress, featured bomb bays divided by structural members. The B-17's bomb capacity, formidable though it was, topped out at 8,000 pounds for short-range missions, and typically carried only 4,000 pounds on the long-range deep penetration raids over Germany. The Lancaster, by contrast, could accommodate weapons of extraordinary size and weight because nothing impeded the vertical clearance of its bomb bay. Initially designed to carry 4,000-pound Cookie high-capacity bombs, the Lancaster would eventually be modified to carry 8,000-pound Cookies, then 12,000-pound Cookies, and finally, with bulged bomb bay doors removed entirely, the colossal Tallboy and Grand Slam earthquake bombs. The prototype Lancaster, serial number BT-308, made its first flight on January 9, 1941, at RAF Ringway, Cheshire, piloted by test pilot H.A. Sam Brown. Flight testing revealed that Chadwick's gamble had paid off magnificently. The Lancaster was faster, more stable, and far more reliable than the Manchester. Pilots found it possessed near-perfect flying characteristics, fast for its size, smooth in flight, and remarkably maneuverable for a heavy bomber. There were even documented instances of Lancasters being looped and barrel-rolled, both intentionally and accidentally, a testament to the aircraft's structural strength and aerodynamic grace. By early 1942, the decision was made to equip bomber command squadrons with the Lancaster as rapidly as production could supply them. The first operational mission occurred on March 2, 1942, when aircraft from No. 44 Squadron laid naval mines near Heligoland Bight. 10 days later, on March 10th, Lancasters conducted their first bombing mission over Essen, Germany. The Lancaster had arrived, and it would soon dominate the night skies over Europe. But Germany, in early 1942, did not yet understand what was coming. German intelligence had catalogued the RAF's heavy bombers, the Halifax, the Stirling, the ill-fated Manchester. They had analyzed British bomb loads, assessed British tactics, and concluded that RAF Bomber Command, while troublesome, could be contained. German anti-aircraft defenses were formidable. Night fighter squadrons, equipped with radar and guided by ground controllers, were inflicting heavy losses on RAF bombers. The Kammhuber Line, a network of radar stations, searchlight batteries, and flak concentrations stretching from Denmark to France, channeled British bombers into killing zones where Messerschmitt Bf 110 and Junkers Ju 88 night fighters waited. What German commanders failed to anticipate was the sheer adaptability of the Lancaster's design. The unobstructed bomb bay, initially seen as a convenient feature for carrying standard ordnance, would become a platform for weapons that defied conventional bombing doctrine. And the man who would exploit this potential was not an airman, but an engineer whose radical theories about how to destroy hardened targets had been dismissed as impractical fantasy. Barnes Wallis, the brilliant and eccentric aeronautical engineer, had been obsessed since 1941 with a concept he called the earthquake bomb. Wallis understood that conventional bombing, dropping high-explosive bombs that detonated on impact, was ineffective against heavily fortified structures like submarine pens, viaducts, and dams. The blast and fragmentation dissipated into the air, leaving reinforced concrete largely intact. Wallis proposed something entirely different. A bomb so heavy, so aerodynamically refined, and dropped from such altitude that it would penetrate deep into the earth beside or beneath a target, then detonate underground. The resulting shockwave, transmitted through the ground rather than the air, would create seismic forces equivalent to an earthquake, hence the name. Wallis's original concept called for a 10-ton bomb dropped from 40,000 feet. No aircraft in the RAF inventory could lift such a weapon to such an altitude. Undeterred, Wallis designed a 6-engine Victory bomber specifically for the task. The Air Ministry, already stretched thin by production demands for existing aircraft types, rejected it. There was, they said, no support for an aircraft with only a single purpose. But Wallis was relentless. In early 1942, as Britain faced the growing threat of German dams supplying water and hydroelectric power to the Ruhr Industrial Valley, Wallis began experimenting with a different approach. Skipping marbles across water tanks in his garden, he developed the concept of a bouncing bomb, a cylindrical mine that would skip across the surface of a reservoir, clear the torpedo nets protecting the dams, sink against the dam wall, and detonate as a depth charge, with the surrounding water concentrating the explosive force on the structure. In April 1942, he formalized his concept in a paper titled Spherical Bomb Surface Torpedo. The bouncing bomb, codenamed Upkeep, weighed 9,250 pounds and required an aircraft capable of carrying it at extremely low altitude 60 feet above the water, while a hydraulic motor spun the cylindrical bomb backward at 500 revolutions per minute. Only the Lancaster, with its unobstructed bomb bay and structural strength, could be modified for this mission. The bomb bay doors were removed, the bomb suspended on laterally pivoted V-shaped struts, and a belt-driven hydraulic motor installed to impart the critical backspin. In March 1943, a new squadron was formed specifically for this operation. No. 617 Squadron, commanded by Wing Commander Guy Gibson, a 24-year-old veteran with a reputation for aggressive leadership and ice-cold composure under fire. Gibson hand-selected crews from across Bomber Command, some veterans, some drafted against their will, some with fewer than a handful of operations flown. For 2 months, they trained obsessively, practicing low-level night flying over British reservoirs, learning to hold precise altitude and speed while under simulated anti-aircraft fire. The mission was codenamed Operation Chastise. On the night of May 16th to 17th, 1943, 133 aircrew in 19 Lancasters took off from RAF Scampton in 3 waves. Their targets were the Möhne, Eder, and Sorp dams in the Ruhr Valley. The dams were defended by anti-aircraft guns positioned in towers on the structures themselves, and torpedo nets stretched across the reservoirs to prevent underwater attack. The Lancasters would have to approach at 60 feet, flying straight and level into the teeth of the defenses, while the bomb aimer guided the pilot using a simple triangular wooden sight with nails aligned to the dam towers. Gibson led the first wave. At 12:28 a.m., his Lancaster attacked the Möhne Dam. The bomb bounced across the water, struck the dam wall, sank, and detonated. The dam shook but held. 4 more Lancasters attacked before the Möhne finally breached. Gibson later wrote of those moments, "This was a horrible moment. We were being dragged along at 4 miles a minute, almost against our will. I think at that moment the boys did not want to go. I know I didn't want to go. I thought to myself, in another minute we shall be dead. So what? The surviving aircraft from Gibson's Wave then flew to the Etter Dam, attacking it until it collapsed at 1:52 a.m. The Sorp Dam, attacked by aircraft from the second and third waves, remained intact. Its different construction resisted the bouncing bomb technique. Of the 19 Lancasters that took off, only 11 returned. 53 aircrew were killed, 3 captured. But the Möhne and Etter dams had been breached, releasing torrents of water into the Ruhr Valley, flooding factories, disrupting transportation, and forcing Germany to divert resources to repair and strengthen its remaining dams. Operation Chastise was, strategically, a mixed success. The immediate industrial damage was significant but not crippling, and the dams were eventually repaired. But the psychological impact on both sides was profound. In Britain, the Dambusters became national heroes, proof that British ingenuity and courage could strike at the heart of Fortress Europe. Guy Gibson was awarded the Victoria Cross. For Germany, the raid was a shock, revealing that even the most heavily defended, most fortified structures were vulnerable to RAF precision attack. And for Barnes-Wallis, the raid validated his earthquake bomb theory. If a 9,000-pound spinning mine could breach a dam, then a properly designed earthquake bomb, streamlined, supersonic, dropped from altitude, could destroy anything. After the dam's raid, 617 Squadron was reconstituted and retrained as a precision bombing unit, preparing for the arrival of Wallis's earthquake bombs. Wallis had scaled down his original 10-ton concept to a 12,000-pound weapon he called Tallboy, 21 feet long, with a diameter of 38 inches. Tallboy was a masterpiece of engineering. Its casing was made of high-grade steel, capable of withstanding the shock of supersonic impact. It carried 5,200 pounds of Tirpitz explosive, a more powerful compound than TNT, giving it a charge-to-weight ratio of 43%. The tail fins were angled to generate spin, stabilizing the bomb's trajectory and allowing it to penetrate deep into soil or concrete before detonation. Tallboy was designed to be dropped from at least 18,000 feet. Falling from that altitude, it would accelerate to 750 miles per hour, striking the earth with the kinetic energy of an artillery shell fired straight down. Upon detonation, the underground explosion would create a seismic shockwave and, if deep enough, a camouflage, a subterranean cavern, that would undermine the target's foundations, causing it to collapse under its own weight. Wallis called this the trapdoor effect, or hangman's drop. Only the Lancaster, among all RAF bombers, could carry Tallboy. The bomb bay doors had to be modified, bulged outward, to accommodate the weapon's length, and later removed entirely. Lancasters designated for Tallboy missions had their nose and dorsal turrets removed to save weight and improve performance. Even so, carrying a Tallboy pushed the Lancaster to its limits, but it could do what no other Allied aircraft could: deliver a 12,000-pound precision-guided earthquake bomb to a target deep in enemy territory. The Tallboy entered operational service in June 1944. On the night of June 8 to 9th, 617 Squadron attacked the Saumur railway tunnel in France, through which German panzer divisions were attempting to move toward the Normandy beaches. Tallboys penetrated the hillside above the tunnel, detonated underground, and caused a massive landslide that blocked the tunnel completely, delaying German reinforcements for weeks. The weapon worked exactly as Wallis had predicted. But Tallboy's most famous mission came 4 months later, against a target that had resisted years of Allied bombing: the German battleship Tirpitz. The sister ship of the Bismarck, Tirpitz was the most powerful warship in the European theater, a constant threat to Allied convoys in the North Atlantic. Hidden in Norwegian fjords, protected by torpedo nets, smoke screens, and anti-aircraft batteries, Tirpitz had survived numerous bombing raids and even a daring attack by British midget submarines. On November 12, 1944, Lancasters from 617 Squadron and 9 Squadron, each carrying a Tallboy, attacked the battleship in Tromsø Fjord. 2 Tallboys struck Tirpitz directly, and a near miss opened the hull. The battleship capsized within minutes, killing nearly 1,000 German sailors. The largest battleship in the German Navy had been destroyed by precision bombing with earthquake bombs carried by Lancasters, a feat no conventional bombing raid had achieved. By late 1944, Wallis's earthquake bomb concept had proven itself beyond doubt. The Air Ministry, which had once dismissed his ideas as impractical, now authorized the construction of the weapon Wallis had originally envisioned, a true 10-ton bomb. Officially designated bomb, medium capacity, 22,000 pounds, it was codenamed Grand Slam. At 25.5 feet long, with a diameter of nearly 4 feet, and weighing 22,400 pounds when fully assembled, the Grand Slam was the largest conventional bomb of the Second World War. Manufacturing a Grand Slam was an engineering challenge in itself. The bomb casing was made of chrome-molybdenum steel alloy, cast around a precision concrete core accurate to 1/10,000th of an inch. After the molten metal cooled, a process taking 2 days, the casing had to be machined to exacting tolerances. The nose and tail sections were then transported 100 miles on specially built road trailers to be filled with Tirpitz explosive. The nose section was upended, and 9,200 pounds of Tirpitz poured in one bucketful at a time. Once the tail section was connected, the completed Grand Slam weighed over 10 tons and had a charge-to-weight ratio of 43%. Because the explosive took 1 full month to set and cool, production was agonizingly slow. Each Grand Slam was irreplaceable, and aircrew were ordered to bring the bomb back to base if they could not drop it on target. A standing order that reflected both the weapon's value and the risk of landing with it still aboard. To carry the Grand Slam, Avro built 32 Lancaster B-17s special aircraft. These were not standard Lancasters. They were stripped of almost every non-essential component. The nose turret, the mid-upper turret, much of the armor plating, even the bomb bay doors. More powerful Merlin 24 engines, rated at 1,610 horsepower, were installed. The undercarriage was strengthened with wheels and tires borrowed from the heavier Avro Lincoln bomber. Even with these modifications, a Lancaster carrying a Grand Slam was barely controllable. Pilots were instructed to refrain from making corrections to the aircraft's flight path. Any use of the controls could aggravate the tendency to wallow. The official pilot's notes warned, "When the store is carried, the aircraft is to be very carefully handled and is restricted to gentle maneuvers only. At weights in excess of 67,000 pounds, there is a tendency for the aircraft to wallow. But use of the controls may aggravate this, and no move should be made to correct it." A Lancaster returning with a Grand Slam could not land at RAF Woodhall Spa, 617 Squadron's home base. The runway was too short. Instead, it had to divert to RAF Carnaby, a specialized emergency airfield with an extra-long runway on the Yorkshire coast. The risk was immense, but so was the potential reward. A single Grand Slam could accomplish what thousands of tons of conventional bombs could not. On March 13, 1945, a test Grand Slam was dropped at the Ashley Range in the New Forest. Squadron leader Hedley Hazelden piloted Lancaster PB-592/G, releasing the bomb from altitude onto a concrete target. Observers watched the black and white painted bomb spin as it fell, accelerating to near supersonic speed. It struck slightly off target, penetrated deep underground, and detonated with a seismic roar. The resulting crater measured 124 feet in diameter and 34 feet deep. Word was immediately sent to 617 Squadron. The Grand Slam worked. Operations could begin. The next day, March 14, 1945, 617 Squadron attacked the Bielefeld Viaduct. 15 Lancasters took off, 14 carrying Tallboys, 1 carrying the first operational Grand Slam. Group Captain Johnny Fauquier, the Canadian commanding officer of 617 Squadron, had personally flown one of the first 2 Grand Slam test flights the day before. Now his squadron would prove the weapon in combat. The weather was clear, visibility good. Oboe-equipped Mosquitoes marked the target with colored indicators. The Lancasters, escorted by 74 Mustang fighters, circled into their bombing runs. From 11,965 feet, far below the optimal 22,000-foot altitude, Squadron leader Calder released the Grand Slam. It fell for 35 seconds, struck 30 yards short of the viaduct, and detonated underground. The explosion was cataclysmic. 200 feet of the North Viaduct and 260 feet of the South Viaduct collapsed into the valley, along with 20,000 tons of debris. Photographic reconnaissance confirmed what observers had shouted over the radio. The viaduct was destroyed. Over 3,500 tons of bombs in 54 previous raids had failed. A single Grand Slam had succeeded. This was not an isolated success. Over the next 5 weeks, 617 Squadron and other Lancaster units dropped 42 Grand Slams on strategic targets across Germany. On March 15th, 2 Grand Slams attacked the railway viaduct at Arnsberg. On March 19th, 6 Grand Slams, accompanied by 13 Tallboys, destroyed the Arnsberg viaduct completely, collapsing 2 spans and blocking a tunnel entrance. On March 21st, Grand Slams struck the railway bridge at Arbergen. On March 22nd, the bridge at Nienberg was destroyed, its spans blown into the river. On March 23rd, another railway bridge near Bremen collapsed under Grand Slam attack. On March 27th, 617 Squadron attacked the Valentine submarine pens at Farge, near Bremen. A massive reinforced concrete structure designed for the assembly of Type XXI U-boats, the most advanced submarines Germany had developed. The roof of the pens was 15 feet thick, with sections being reinforced to 23 feet. 13 Lancasters carried Grand Slams, the remainder Tallboys. The bombs were fused for 1-hour delays, but 3 detonated immediately upon impact. 2 Grand Slams and 1 Tallboy scored direct hits on the unthickened sections of the roof, penetrating 8 feet into the concrete before detonating. The explosions brought down approximately 1,000 tons of the roof, destroyed 2 movable cranes, and caused catastrophic damage to the structure. Marines inside the building reported that the concussive effect was overwhelming, severely damaging morale. No aircraft were lost. On April 9th, Grand Slams attacked the Finkenwerder U-boat pens in Hamburg, penetrating the roof and depositing hundreds of tons of concrete into the pens, damaging 2 U-boats and killing 27 workers. On April 19th, the final Grand Slam operation of the war, 6 Grand Slams and 14 Tallboys attacked the coastal gun batteries on the island of Heligoland, silencing anti-aircraft defenses that had resisted a raid by nearly 1,000 bombers the day before. By the end of the war, the Lancaster had delivered 608,612 long tons of bombs in 156,000 sorties. This was more than any other British bomber, and the Lancaster's unobstructed bomb bay had enabled it to carry weapons no other aircraft could lift. The mathematics of the Lancaster's capacity, compared to the B-17, tell the story starkly. A B-17 Flying Fortress, on a typical long-range mission, carried 4,000 pounds of bombs. On short-range missions with reduced fuel, it could carry up to 8,000 pounds. A Lancaster, in standard configuration, carried 14,000 pounds. With modifications, it carried the 12,000-pound Tallboy. With extensive modifications, it carried the 22,000-pound Grand Slam. 5 B-17s, each carrying 8,000 pounds, their maximum short-range payload, would deliver 40,000 pounds total. A single Lancaster, carrying a Grand Slam, delivered 22,000 pounds in one bomb. The disparity was not a matter of American inferiority or British superiority. The B-17 was a superb aircraft, designed for daylight precision bombing at high altitude, with heavy defensive armament. But the Lancaster had been designed, from the first blueprint, with an unobstructed bomb bay that could accommodate the unimaginable. The German response to the Lancaster's earthquake bomb capability was one of shock and helplessness. Structures that had been considered invulnerable, submarine pens with 20-foot concrete roofs, viaducts built to withstand conventional artillery, bridges designed to carry the weight of panzer divisions, crumbled under Grand Slam and Tallboy attack. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, later testified during his interrogation about the impact of strategic bombing on German war production. In his writings, Speer acknowledged that Bomber Command's relentless attacks had tied up vast resources in anti-aircraft defenses, diverted labor and materials to reconstruction, and ultimately crippled Germany's ability to sustain its war effort. Speer specifically noted, "We would have kept our promised output of submarines for Admiral Donit's U-boat war if the bombers had not destroyed a third of them in the ports. The earthquake bombs delivered by Lancasters were instrumental in that destruction." Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, the head of RAF Bomber Command, spoke at a reunion dinner in April 1977 and reflected on the Lancasters' contribution to victory. He recounted how General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had personally thanked Bomber Command for its support during the invasion of Europe, calling it one of the most effective parts of his entire organization, always seeking, finding, and using new ways for their particular type of warfare. Harris's response to Eisenhower had been succinct. "You know by now you can always depend on my lads for anything short of the impossible." Then, Harris noted, Eisenhower's headquarters had scrawled across that message a note indicating that Bomber Command had achieved the impossible on behalf of the armies. Harris also quoted Speer's assessment that strategic bombing was the greatest loss of all to Germany's war effort. When critics claimed that Bomber Command's impact had been exaggerated, Harris asked pointedly, "Who would you like to believe?" The evidence, Harris insisted, was irrefutable. The Lancaster, more than any other aircraft, had delivered that evidence in the form of 600,000 tons of high explosives and incendiaries dropped across Fortress Europe. The Lancaster story is, at its core, a story of transformation. It was born from the ashes of a failed design, the unreliable, dangerous Manchester, and transformed by the genius of Roy Chadwick into a weapon of extraordinary versatility and power. Chadwick, who was appointed a commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1943 for his work on the Lancaster and his adaptations for the Dams raid, did not live to see the full legacy of his creation. He died in a plane crash in 1947 while testing an Avro Tudor airliner. But his Lancaster endured, serving in roles far beyond its original bomber mission. As a maritime patrol aircraft, an air-sea rescue platform, a photographic reconnaissance aircraft, an aerial refueling tanker, and even, in its Lancastrian variant, as a transatlantic passenger airliner. Barnes Wallis, the engineer whose earthquake bomb theories had been dismissed as fanciful, saw his concepts vindicated beyond question. The Tallboy and Grand Slam proved that precision could triumph over brute force, that scientific understanding of physics and engineering could create weapons capable of destroying what conventional bombing could not touch. Wallis's legacy extended into the post-war era, influencing the development of bunker-buster munitions and deep penetration weapons that remain in use today. For 617 Squadron, the unit that had carried the bouncing bomb to the dams, the Tallboy to Tirpitz, and the Grand Slam to the bridges and viaducts of the Third Reich, the war ended on April 25, 1945, with a final mission against Adolf Hitler's retreat at Berchtesgaden. The squadron's reputation as Bomber Command's ultimate precision bombing specialists was unassailable. Its losses had been severe, flying at low altitude over heavily defended targets, conducting daylight precision raids in the final months of the war. 617 Squadron had paid a heavy price. But its achievements had redefined what strategic bombing could accomplish. The Lancaster's unobstructed bomb bay, that simple design choice made by Roy Chadwick when he transformed a failed Manchester into a world-beating bomber, had enabled Britain to field a weapon system unmatched by any other combatant in the Second World War. It could carry more than 5 American B-17s not because it was a larger aircraft, it was not, but because its designers had prioritized payload capacity and structural simplicity over compartmentalized design. The B-17's divided bomb bay, necessary for its structural integrity and defensive armament layout, limited it to bombs that could fit within those constraints. The Lancaster's open bay could accommodate anything that could physically hang beneath the fuselage, from 9,000-pound bouncing bombs to 22,000-pound earthquake bombs. This was not a matter of propaganda or exaggeration. The numbers are unassailable. A B-17 at maximum short-range capacity could carry 8,000 pounds. A Lancaster, modified for Grand Slam, carried 22,000 pounds. The title's claim that a Lancaster could carry what 5 B-17s could not is mathematically precise. 5 B-17s at 8,000 pounds each total 40,000 pounds. A Lancaster could not carry 40,000 pounds. But a single Lancaster could carry a weapon, the Grand Slam, that weighed more than what any single B-17 could carry, and it could deliver that weapon with a precision and effect that mass formations of conventional bombers could not achieve. The strategic implications of this capability were profound. Precision bombing, which had been a theoretical aspiration at the start of the war, became a reality because the Lancaster could carry the bombs that Barnes Wallis designed and because 617 Squadron and other units developed the techniques to deliver them accurately. The stabilized automatic bomb sight, radar navigation aids like H2S and oboe, and the skill of the aircrews combined to create a system that could strike targets with devastating accuracy. The psychological impact on both sides cannot be overstated. For the Allies, the Lancaster represented hope, tangible proof that British engineering and courage could strike back at a seemingly invincible enemy. For Germany, the Lancaster, particularly in its earthquake bomb configuration, represented a terror that grew with each successful raid. When Grand Slams began falling in March 1945, collapsing bridges and viaducts that had withstood months of bombardment, German commanders realized that their most critical infrastructure was no longer safe. The strategic railway network that linked the Ruhr industrial region to the rest of Germany could be severed with surgical precision. Submarine pens, previously thought to be impregnable fortresses, could be penetrated and destroyed. Even the mighty Tirpitz, hidden in a remote Norwegian fjord and protected by every defensive measure Germany could muster, had been sunk by precision bombing. This was the legacy of Roy Chadwick's Lancaster. It was not the largest bomber of the war. The American B-29 Superfortress was larger and could carry heavier loads, though it served exclusively in the Pacific theater. It was not the fastest or the most heavily armed, but it was, in the words of the pilots who flew it, a near-perfect flying machine. It was reliable, adaptable, and capable of missions that ranged from low-level dambusting to high-altitude precision strikes, from nocturnal area bombing to daylight attacks on pinpoint targets. The story of the Lancaster is also a story of the men who flew it. 7-man crews, pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, and rear gunner, crammed into the fuselage for missions that lasted 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours or more. The rear gunner, isolated in his turret at the tail, sat in sub-zero temperatures without heating, relying on electrically heated suits to prevent frostbite, scanning the darkness for night fighters that could appear without warning. The mid-upper gunner, perched in his turret above the fuselage, had a 360-degree view but sat on a sling of canvas, unable to move for the duration of the mission. The bomb aimer, lying prone in the nose, guided the pilot over the target using the bomb sight, often while anti-aircraft fire exploded around the aircraft. These men faced losses that were statistically almost certain. Arthur Harris, in a speech after the war, said of them, "There are no words with which I can do justice to the aircrews who fought under my command. There is no parallel in wartime to such courage and determination in the face of danger over so prolonged a period, of danger which at times was so great that scarcely 1 man in 3 could expect to survive. Yet they flew mission after mission because they believed in the cause and because they trusted the aircraft. The Lancaster, for all its technical brilliance, was ultimately only as effective as the men who flew it into the teeth of the most heavily defended airspace in history. By the end of the war in Europe, over 7,300 Lancasters had been built. They had flown 156,000 sorties and dropped over 608,000 tons of bombs. They had attacked every major German city, every critical industrial target, every strategic railway junction and canal. They had sunk the Tirpitz, breached the dams of the Ruhr, destroyed the viaducts and bridges that linked Germany's war machine to its resources. And in the final months of the war, when Germany was collapsing but still fighting with desperate ferocity, Lancasters carrying Grand Slam and Tallboy bombs had severed the arteries of German resistance, isolating the Ruhr, blocking U-boat production, and demonstrating that no fortification, no matter how massive, could withstand the combination of British engineering and precision bombing technique. The Lancaster was eventually supplanted by the Avro Lincoln, a larger and more powerful derivative, in the post-war RAF. But its legend endured. When the RAF needed a long-range maritime patrol aircraft, Lancasters were converted to fill the role, serving until replaced by the Shackleton. When the Berlin airlift demanded cargo capacity, Lancaster derivatives, Yorks and Lancastrians, carried 1/3 of the British tonnage. When the RAF needed to test new jet engines in the post-war era, Lancasters served as flying testbeds. Today, only 2 Lancasters remain in airworthy condition. One is maintained by the Royal Air Force Battle of Britain Memorial Flight in the United Kingdom. The other is operated by the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario. Both aircraft are flown at airshows and memorial events, their Merlin engines producing the distinctive sound that, for those who lived through the war, evokes memories of nights when the sky above Britain filled with the roar of bombers departing for Germany, and mornings when fewer returned. The story of how the Lancasters' bomb bay could carry what 5 B-17s could not is a story of vision, desperation, genius, and courage. It is a story that began with the catastrophic failure of the Manchester, was rescued by Roy Chadwick's decision to replace 2 unreliable engines with 4 proven ones while retaining an unobstructed bomb bay, and culminated in the delivery of the largest conventional bombs of the Second World War against targets that defied all other attempts to destroy them. It is a story of Barnes Wallis, the engineer who refused to accept that hardened targets were invulnerable, and who designed weapons that changed the physics of strategic bombing. It is a story of 617 Squadron and the countless other Lancaster crews who flew into the darkness, knowing the odds, trusting their aircraft, and delivering the blows that helped bring the Third Reich to its knees. When that single Lancaster released the first operational Grand Slam over Bielefeld on March 14, 1945, and the viaduct that had withstood 3,500 tons of bombs collapsed under one 10-ton weapon, it was the vindication of every choice, every risk, every sacrifice that had gone into creating the Lancaster. Roy Chadwick had designed an aircraft with an unobstructed bomb bay because it was logical and efficient. Barnes Wallis had designed a bomb that required an unobstructed bomb bay because it was the only way to destroy the targets that mattered. Together, they had created a weapon system that, for a brief moment in history, redefined what was possible. And that is why, when someone asks how a Lancaster could carry what 5 American B-17s could not, the answer is not found in national rivalry or crude comparisons of size and power. The answer is found in a design philosophy that prioritized adaptability, in an engineer's refusal to accept failure, in a scientist's radical rethinking of how to destroy the indestructible, and in the courage of the men who flew the missions that turned theory into thunderous, earth-shaking reality.